Continuing on part 2 for our discussion of chapters 2 and 3, so the transition into chapter 3. I left off talking about the practice of chivalry, and the practice of chivalry can involve neighbors expressing dislike for something that someone has done, maybe some amount of dishonesty or cheating someone on a trade, or someone who is engaged in spousal abuse, and the standards for spousal abuse and child abuse were different in the colonial period, a little bit more lax, but certainly there were times when neighbors would express displeasure if something was disruptive to the community. Even a couple living together unmarried, so a romantic couple living together unmarried, then there might be chivalry. And with chivalry, there were neighbors who might they would bang pots and pans and make a lot of noise to display their displeasure. As a matter of fact, I just looked up the meaning of the translation of charivari, and what I found in translation to that French word to English, it translates into pandemonium, which is something that is, chaotic. You have some chaos that's happening. But the other time that neighbors might have engaged in chivalry is when they're expressing pleasure or celebration. So that relationship between family and community was seamless in some ways. So it was not viewed as inappropriate as it might be today to have your neighbors who are expressing an opinion about something that you're doing within your family, within your home. So very different from the colonial period, and very different even today if you look at small communities. In small towns, you kind of get a little bit of that kind of knowledge of what other neighbors are doing, not to the extent that you had in the colonial period, but still there's a little bit of that, those close relationships that you have that you had in the colonial period, you can see today in small towns, very small towns. And I don't mean like small town as in a population of 30,000. I'm talking small town as maybe a population of 5,000, or or lower than that. So I mentioned some of the reasons why this connection between family and community were important. For instance, with finding a marital partner, or arranging a marriage for a child. But the other important point of having these kind of close relationships is that the community acted as social control. So they acted as a social control agent to make sure that people were following the norms. They were conforming to the norms, the guidelines for behavior in the community. And if they were not following those guidelines, they were not conforming to the norms, then public shaming would take place. Chivalry is a form of public shaming, but also, as you see here in this image, the stocks were a form of public shaming. People would be placed in, if you can imagine this, people would be placed in what's called the stocks in maybe a town square where everybody would see you. So there's embarrassment for the individuals who are being punished, so it's a form of punishment, but there also is a warning to other people in the community that if you are to violate the norms of the community, you also might end up in the same position. Even thinking about the Scarlet Letter, the Scarlet Letter, if you're familiar with that story, meaning adulterer. So this is something that was that very public, and that was important to maintaining certain social standards. Punishment today, think about the difference in punishment today. Punishment in the colonial period is very public, life is very public, and then slowly as we start making this transition into the industrial period, People start moving away from their small towns, from those villages. They move into cities where they may be surrounded by people who they don't know. They may have come to the city, moved to the city with maybe one or a couple of family members. Some family members might have stayed behind. So then you don't have that intimate knowledge of people who are living in now your neighborhood, a neighborhood that's in a larger city. So what that means is that many functions that families served, we start to see those taken on by institutions in the community. So instead of placing people on public display who are being punished, we might see we did see the start of enclosed jails, prisons, where punishment is still taking place, rehabilitation is taking place, but it's not where the public can see. I mean, imagine if that was the case today, if we still had the stocks today. If someone is caught, shoplifting, then, imagine them being out in a, public square in, the middle of, Rancho Cucamonga, or whatever whatever the town is, being on public display in that way. Very different time. So with the industrial period, we start to see, as I mentioned, people moving to these larger cities. You have advances in technology bringing about mass production. The industrialization in the U.S. dates from the early 1800s and kind of reaches a peak, and then we start to see a leveling off around the 1950s. And we still see some, you might think today, well, there are still some factories around, but what we continue to see is just this advance with technology. So with the advances in technology during the industrial period, it became possible to have some of these items that were being produced by hand, like making a chair, or a stool, or a pair of pants. We may see those items that can be produced on a mass scale, so that much more can be put out there for public consumption, but also families didn't have to make those things anymore. And in our society today, which is a post-industrial society, which is marked by advanced high technology and globalization, what we see is that increasingly we can make all of these goods that we did during the industrial period, but we make them with fewer people. We don't need the same level of human labor to make them. Okay, so that was just a quick comment about today's time period, post-industrial, but let's go back to the industrial period. So in the industrial period, you have people who are, moving to cities, and, let's say you want to, seek out success in the city, and maybe your parents, they don't have any, or your father doesn't have any land to give you. Maybe you're a son and a younger son, and there's no land to give you. So then that would be kind of a push factor, something that is pushing you out of the community to kind of try to seek your financial security elsewhere. But also cities held a pull factor, and that pull factor was the existence of the factories. As the factories were being built and being opened, then this is kind of a dynamic that might influence you to move there. So with migration, when people migrate, regardless of the culture, when people migrate, there are push factors, kind of factors that kind of push them out of where they're currently living, and then pull factors, trying to get them to that place, to another location, if it's another city or if it's another country, for instance. So now in the industrial period, we have the family wage economy. So we've kind of progressed from the family-based economy, we've changed to the family wage economy. Individuals are earning a wage in places like factories, or maybe they were small shop owners, for instance. So they're earning money. So no longer, on the one hand, that might seem like a more civil, quote unquote, civilized way to live, But on the other hand, you have people who kind of lose the skill as far as being able to do for themselves. They're no longer growing they're no longer growing their own food, slaughtering their own animals. They're dependent upon others to purchase these things, to purchase their clothes or purchase equipment that they may need. Equipment as in like a laundry tub or things like that. It's not something that's right there in your community. It's not something that you're going to be trading. It's like trading services or trading goods. It's an economy that is dealing with a monetary system. So this is a advanced capitalism that's growing, advanced industrial capitalist economy. Okay, change is uneven. So something that's important to think about is that families experience change in an uneven way. So and so that's why when we talk about the transition to the industrial period, we say the 1800s, because some families were poor, that didn't have resources that other families did, or didn't move out of the countryside, the rural areas as quickly as some did. And then at the same time, you have some families, some people who are immigrating from other countries. So they're moving from what was probably an agriculturally based society where they've come from, and they're moving to maybe New York City and going to work in a factory. So their lives are shifting at a different rate. Also, in the early 1800s, we still have chattel slavery that exists. So we have people living in different situations. So at the same time, we have industrialization taking off in the northern part of the United States. We also have southern states where there's still a slave system, and it's a land-based system. So this change going from colonial to industrial is uneven. The notion that kind of males took care of their families in the industrial kind of arose in the industrial period. The notion that they went out, they left the home to work to earn a wage, and then they would support their family with that wage. The men who were able to do that were men who were middle class, upper class, but for people who were poor, women were working. So you didn't have that kind of strict separation between what men did and what women did. If the family was poor, you might also see their children who were continuing to work. Children were working in the colonial era, even though in the industrial period we start to think of this period of life called childhood. If you were poor, if your family was poor, you didn't have the luxury to say, to your children, no, you don't have to work. You can and you can go to school full time. You can just be engaged in recreation or learning. So that is a luxury for middle class families and for upper class families. So overall, what I hope you're kind of getting is that it's important to see families within a context. We have to see them within the context in which people are living. The economy has a lot to do with what's happening with families, because we adapt to the family. The reason why we start seeing changes, for example, more recently, like in an increase in the divorce rate, those types of issues are not just individual problems, as C. Wright Mills would tell us, and there's a video on C. Wright Mills posted on Moodle. Those issues, those problems that individuals are experiencing are explained by and connected to the larger society. So we have to stop and think that, what else, and ask, what is going on in society that's leading to high divorce rates, for instance. And we're going to kind of continue this discussion and continue kind of applying our sociological imagination to all of these changes that are happening with families in these different time periods. Thank you.